Okay, welcome everyone to the Asheville City Council work session. Sorry for a little bit of a delay there. This is our capital improvement program process and initial general obligation bond planning session. So I'm going to turn it over to the city manager, Deborah Campbell, to take it away.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. This is a unique opportunity for us to kind of pull together a number of work sessions that we have had with council and the community over the past couple of months. We've had discussions about water infrastructure. We've had conversations about our facilities study. And now this is kind of a culmination of we've had a parking study. We've had a whole bunch of studies that we're pulling together to provide you with a much more holistic and comprehensive look at our capital needs. But in addition to that, we want to provide for you information on not just what our needs are, but the potential for us to find the revenue and funding that's needed for us to pay for these needs. So we have our experts that are here that are going to help us and provide for you information on our capacity to borrow money in order, again, for us to meet those needs. So we're going to start with Taylor Floyd, who's going to provide you with an overview of what our agenda is. And Taylor, if you want to go to the next slide. So you will see that we're going to provide you with just an overview of the budget process, give you a more detailed look at the capital budgeting process, the needs and prioritization, the GO bond referendum planning, what we have been doing, because we know that in 2016, I believe that was our last referendum, that was a bit rushed, and we wanted to make sure that we had plenty of time to deliberate and look very strategically at those potential projects as well as the funding needs. And again, also equally important is the financial planning for how do we meet and pay for those needs in a responsible manner. So Taylor, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Campbell. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Taylor Floyd, Budget Manager. Thank you for that introduction. Start with our key takeaways. None of these, I think, will be a surprise. I think we've stated all of these pieces of information for you all in the past, but our capital investments in our facilities, our equipment, our infrastructure really are essential to the service delivery that the City of Asheville provides in this community. We have ongoing planning efforts that have helped us to identify and prioritize those needs. We're doing both internal staff review and external review now, and we'll continue that through the rest of the budget process and the potential 2024 bond cycle. And we need that 2024 bond because we have some additional resources that we need to continue our existing service delivery and also meet the goals that you all have identified. So I'm going to start with an overview of our budget process broadly. This is the first time that we're coming to you, our first budget work session. As Ms. Campbell mentioned, we've had a few infrastructure and facility related work sessions in the last few months, but wanted to give you all an idea of where we're headed with the budget process. Our process will be similar to how it's been in past years. Right now, we're on that internal work. That'll kind of transition once the new calendar year starts into some priority and goal setting. You all have your council retreat. We'll shift from there, take that feedback, incorporate it into our plan, and get to kind of the decision-making stage, which culminates in a proposed budget. A budget adoption with any adjustments that you all direct us to make in June, and then we'll start a new fiscal year in July. So kind of looking at that from a key dates, council meetings and work sessions through the budget process. We're here today on December 12th with our first work session. We have a number of work sessions planned, as you can see, and then proposed budget in May, public hearing, and then adoption in June. One thing I do want to make note of is if you all recall last year, we had a public comment at council in January, I believe it was in January last year, to kind of kick off the budget process, again, kind of in a formal fashion. We're going to do that again, and we'll also have a survey like we did last year. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Again, our guiding principles for budget development are really about resourcing ourselves to deliver essential services, to do that in a cost-effective way, enhancing our customer value, and to make strategic investments that are in line with your stated goals. And those goals, as you all established, affirmed at your council retreat last year, listed here. I won't read them off again. You all are very familiar with these. But these are, again, what we use to help guide our process. Any questions on that? So again, just a quick high level where we're headed over the next several months. So trying to set a little bit of a context for the discussion that we'll be having later on. Just some basics about capital. What is it? It's essentially big, expensive things that last for a long time. Why do we budget it separately? They're usually project-based, so kind of have a defined start and end. We're usually building something as opposed to a program-based, something that we're sort of continuing on an annual basis. But they do usually have a longer time horizon. So typically these projects take more than one fiscal year for us to accomplish. Again, they're expensive, and then we typically utilize debt to pay for those. So that's why we kind of talk about them and fund them in a separate pot, if you will. And then how we pay for those, again, are primarily debt. We do use some PAYGO or cash. And then, of course, where we have opportunity to get other resources, we try to take advantage of that. So how do capital projects impact services? I think often it's easy for us to think about when we're thinking about service delivery, about the people in this organization that do that. We are a service-driven organization. But capital projects are really an essential part of that. In some instances, they sort of are the service. If you think about the infrastructure, you think about road conditions, right? Like you have to have a road to drive on. In some instances, our staff utilize capital investments to do their jobs. Probably the easiest example or most obvious example of that is vehicles and equipment that we fund through our capital program. And then lastly, these investments really are critical to achieving goals. For example, equity and inclusion goals, making investments in ADA accessibility, sustainability goals, preservation of historic buildings, just as a few examples. So this is a chart of our capital spending over the last several years. The actual spend you can see there in that darker blue color, and then some estimates looking forward in the lighter blue. And what I want to make note of here, you kind of see that spike. That's really representative of a few things. One is an investment council made in FY14, raising the tax rate by 3 pennies and directing that towards capital. Started to really ramp up our capital program in earnest. Then kind of that peak is a combination of some spending from RADTIP, which was a pretty significant, I think our largest capital project to date. And then also the 2016 bonds. But you can see that over the last couple of years, we've kind of, that peak, we peaked, I guess I should say, and our spending's kind of getting back down a little lower around that 20 million mark, which if you take out the 25 and 26 bumps, which is essentially the McCormick Field project, kind of maintaining that investment over the next several years. So how do we plan those investments? We kind of start with our funding capacity. What do we think we have the ability to fund? We identify needs through estimating costs. We look at plan studies, community engagement, and then we use that to help prioritize, which is how we ultimately end up with our capital improvement plan. And then that plan really does inform the funding capacity that we have. So again, it's very cyclical in nature. Another way to look at that sort of repeating process, this is a clip from our actual budget document. This is our 5-year capital improvement program, our CIP. Just to note, what you all adopt with the budget is really just that first year of the CIP. So those projects are adopted and funded, and the rest is truly a plan. So every year, if you kind of think about that first year's adopted, that one's going on. The folks in our capital projects departments or other departments are working on those. We're planning those 4 years and then kind of adding a new out year in that 5th year. So again, just to kind of hit on this a little harder, when you think about active projects, which come to you all frequently during council meetings with big construction contracts and things like that, those are really previously adopted projects. And some of those are annual, like our street resurfacing or our vehicle fleet replacement. Some of them are individual plans, or individual projects like the ones listed here. But that's really not what we're focused on today. We're really kind of looking forward at those planned projects and how we identify, prioritize, and ultimately fund those planned projects. So again, some of those are annual in nature, and then we have some that are, again, some examples you can see there that are currently in our 5-year CIP. Another reminder, we did make some substantial adjustments to our CIP in last year's budget cycle. The primary one being the addition of McCormick Field. We also have the I-26 betterments and aesthetic improvements that you all decided to support, but that's actually not going to come due. We're not going to have to pay that bill to NCO DOT until FY27. And then we did also add $2.1 million to existing municipal building project to try to complete some repairs in that building. So kind of summarizing, again, the high-level capital information, our CIP is primarily funded with debt, and that's supported by about $15 million annual allocation from the general fund. The Carters, our financial advisors, will talk a little bit more about what we do with that $15 million annual allocation. Our current capital improvement program consists primarily of maintenance projects. There's not a lot of new things, really, with the exception of some of the items that were added last year. And then we have limited capacity to add projects or additional costs within our existing resources. And again, that's really why we're looking at a 2024 bond. Any questions before I move on? All right, so I think this is the last section that I'm gonna speak to a little bit about how we identify needs and prioritize needs. So of course, we're looking at plans and studies to help prioritize and identify. We're looking at our goals, including sustainability, equity, core service delivery. We're working on community engagement, and that's happening both through the budget process, that's happening through the development of those plans and studies, and then that's also really happening in that project development, even again, those adopted projects. As we get more into scoping, there's a lot of community interaction that's going on during that time. And one other thing we wanted to mention is we are trying to take a holistic approach. The best example of that being one of our 2016 bond projects on Haywood Street, partnering with MSD, partnering with the Water Fund to do some work that they needed to do, and really utilizing that to improve or to add resources to that project and improve the amount of things we were able to do. So a reminder, we've had 3 work sessions with you all already, starting with one on Thomas Wolfe in September. Walter Ear presented twice to you all in October and November on our facilities needs, talked a little bit about our growing city, staff and services, and the capacity constraints we have. He also talked about our ongoing maintenance needs, and then really about funding and how that is critical to prioritizing and really sequencing some of those large projects that we need to help make your priorities a reality. So the Thomas Wolfe Auditorium work session, as a reminder, there's already repairs underway to kind of return that in the short term to full capacity. Looking at a longer term renovation that I think you all talked a lot about, that $130 to $150 million range. And really next steps there is continuing to work on that plan, develop that plan, understand where we have capacity, what our partnerships might look like there. The first facility work session really focused on facility maintenance. Now I would say the main takeaway is that middle bullet there that based on our facility condition assessment, we think we need about $3.5 million annually just to maintain service in our existing facilities. The second work session was really more about that planning process and trying to align and prioritize with your priorities and really kind of make a schedule, make a plan that would allow us to build towards those priorities. And then I think the key piece there is that incremental approach, trying to phase these projects in a way that allows us to break these really complex opportunities we have down into more manageable pieces. At that work session, we also had a consultant tell you a little bit about some of our pretty significant needs in our parking garages. Just to note, those needs we'll be looking at through the budget process, and those will be funded, since parking is an enterprise fund, through the user fees that are charged for those services. Those of you on the Policy, Finance, and Human Resources Committee, I think I got all the words right there, this morning heard about some of our water infrastructure needs. Those, again, water is an enterprise fund. Those would be funded through the user fees charged for those services, but we have some really significant projects planned in the water capital around water treatment and then the meter replacement project. And this seems to have frozen. Oh.
There you go.
All right. As I've mentioned, we also have a number of plans and studies, the GAP plan just as an example, a lot of projects identified and prioritized as part of that plan. So again, we're trying to work all of these things into our capital planning. Another thing that we're looking at internally is data that we have available. So we are a part of the UNC School of Government benchmarking project. This is something that we're excited to be a part of. And essentially it's, a group of municipalities across the state that provide data to the School of Government, and they do some data cleaning. So I will say that this is preliminary data. So I did take some of the numbers off of the other places because I didn't want to get in trouble with any of these other places or the School of Government for showing this before it's finalized.
Remind us what PCI is.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I need some
PCI
help.
or PCR is Pavement Condition Index or rating. So this is on a scale of 100, sort of a rating, if you will, of our road condition for the overall network. So as you can see, and we didn't, these aren't all the participants, we tried to pull some of the larger ones. We are a bit behind, and that has improved, again, because of the investments that were made through the 2016 bond program. We put a significant amount of resources into repaving.
Does some of that also relate to the fact that we have winter conditions that impact pavement in a way that these other jurisdictions won't?
Sure, there's a number of things, and that's one of the interesting parts of the benchmarking project is getting to talk with other municipalities about the numbers say something, right? But there's always a story behind the numbers, so kind of getting to understand, what the idiosyncrasies of any individual place is.
And I assume it's just city road and not DOT maintained road, or I think we have something like 20 or 25% of private roads within the city limits that are not city maintained. Yeah, we have a huge number. Yeah. Because what happens over time, developers would build developments with roads that don't meet public road standard requirements, and we won't take them to service them until they're brought up to our specifications, and a lot of communities just say, forget it, we'll just wheel our garbage can down to the end of the block instead of have to meet the requirements.
Yeah, these would definitely be roads that we're responsible for maintaining. Looking at this a slightly different way, the percentage of lane miles that have a PCI or PCR of 85 or higher, so that'd be really good, either fairly recently repaved or just in great shape. And as you can see again, we're sort of on the lower end, not the lowest. We won't say any names, even though it's on the screen. But really, one of the things that this kind of indicates is, again, we've made a really substantial investment, especially through the 2016 bonds in our repaving program. However, without continuing that investment, because we have such a small percentage of our overall network that's, again, probably freshly repaved, we're going to start to see this number decline quicker because we have such a backlog.
But also, I will point out, these other cities are able to require annexation of subdivisions that tap onto their water service. and they instantly get a freshly paved subdivision in their city limits, which we, by local legislation, cannot do.
I also wonder which of the ones on the next, like which have ongoing transportation bond programs, because my understanding is that bonding for,
Definitely not
exactly,
Charlotte,
for
right?
bonding for programs like this, whether it's sidewalks or street repaving, or when we did greenways in 2016 or 14, that type of infrastructure is ongoing reinvestment. So it does make me think between all of our community priorities, bonding for transportation is so often really well rated by community members that I wonder if that's a conversation we should be considering for this upcoming bond.
Tony actually, in his section, has a slide about how those bond referenda generally go
I
in the
love
state.
that
That's
slide.
interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was
Very
really
popular.
And this is the last of these that I'll show you all. And again, I think just trying to say, we're trying to look at data to help inform how we're prioritizing our needs. And this is just a challenge that we have here. It's more expensive here to resurface than it is in some of the larger parts of the state.
Right.
And that's really about, I think, primarily our market here relative to those places. So again, on that right side, what are the things that we're looking at as we're prioritizing these projects? It's the priorities that you all have laid out: equity and inclusion, sustainability. It's the work we've already done on adopted and in-process plans. It's your strategic priorities. And of course, we're looking at urgency. Do we have public safety concerns and impact? And then location. Are we making sure that we're making these investments across the city? So broadly, from a process standpoint, departments are really the ones that we look to help us identify projects. Staff in our division and budget and performance kind of gather all of that information and kind of shepherd that information through the process. We have an interdepartmental team that's done review of projects. We're working on community engagement, which I'll speak to in just a moment. Then, of course, we're looking for feedback from you all through work sessions through the budget process. One thing I did want to mention that's on a slightly separate track is affordable housing. That's really working on a bit of a parallel process, and we're really looking towards the affordable housing plan that's underway right now to inform what our opportunities might be as it relates to an affordable housing bond referendum. So on the community engagement, budget and performance, staff have already attended some community group and neighborhood meetings. And what we're doing right now is really just try to let folks know that we're coming. So we're trying to tell them, this is something we're looking at. We're trying to identify projects. We're wanting to hear from you all, from the community about where they see needs in their neighborhoods. But really to tell them that we're coming back, so be on the lookout. So again, we're constantly trying to get that feedback and then incorporate it into our planning. One thing that we're planning to do is have just a map of the projects that we've identified so that we can go to a community and say, here are the things that we, on a map you can see, right? Like your neighborhood, here's what we've identified. We are also hoping to utilize the results from the National Community Survey, which I think will be underway shortly, and I think we'll get the results of that in January, if I'm not mistaken, to help us as we go do our budget survey. We really want to use that National Community Survey to see what those priorities are and use the budget survey to kind of hone in on those priorities and ask some deeper questions to get a better sense of what folks are looking for. And then we'll continue to do the attending community groups, neighborhood meetings, working with community leaders as best we can, again, to get that feedback and then incorporate that into our plans. So a little bit about our internal process. We had over 100 projects that were submitted and reviewed by that interdepartmental team that I mentioned earlier. Those projects came from a variety of places: parks, public safety, and other facilities, streets and sidewalks, greenways, fleet. We did a quick scan of those projects. Many, I would say most, could likely be funded through GEO bonds. There's some that we probably wouldn't for some reason, or some like parking or fleet and equipment that really wouldn't make sense to. And we're still working on identifying and reviewing projects. So again, that work's underway, but it is also ongoing.
I have a question on this slide.
Sure.
I understand from process, I've done a lot of budget cycles where you need to hear the ideas and then go through a process of evaluating them, and that there's a risk to sharing that with, per se, maybe a council who might want to cherry pick or be part of a conversation that we don't have all the context for. So that's my like precursor. And I just have a curiosity to understand like the depth, scope, and breadth of like what all the departments are asking for. Because I understand that our role is to be at the organizational budget level, not a departmental budget level. But I also seeing the awesome work the management and finance office has been doing over the years to show us we need to be investing more in capital, and that being a true story. I guess, is there a way that we could gain that perspective into the breadth and depth of needs at the department levels and just kind of the scope of those things in a way that ensures that we don't meddle or cherry pick and say, well, you should put this one on the list? Because I don't want to do that. I feel like there's something I'm not seeing where I might see a worker in a department who's a line level and they're like, we've been asking for this for years. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's helpful to hear, but I feel like I'm not seeing that and it could help me for perspective.
I think we will have ample opportunity to provide you all with a wealth of information. I would say right now we're not positioned to do that, but we certainly will be bringing many lists for review, again, through the rest of the budget process.
Great, so yeah, again, just.
And I think that this is again, the culmination of just trying to give you all just that universe of, there are lots
Yeah.
of needs in this community related to capital. We're trying to, as best we can, look at those numerous numbers of projects and then connect the dots, make the alignments that with your council priorities, with the survey, with the da. So when we come back, we don't want to have just a laundry list of projects. We want to say,
Right.
these are the projects that we sincerely feel check those boxes, that have alignment, that we hope, from the community survey, from all of those things, we will be able to demonstrate the needs, the alignments, and the opportunity to fund them. And that's the other huge challenge for us.
I have a question, Floyd, on slide number 31, if you could go back to that one.
Sure.
Okay, I'll go back to it. Okay. And what I was concerned about was infrastructure. You were saying here in Asheville, basically, our cost is a lot higher. You said market, but I would.
Speaking to
Oh,
the mic.
okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, but when you were talking about the infrastructure cost here and how much higher it is than other areas, and you said it's the market, could you please elaborate exactly how that and why?
Sure, I'll
And if
do
we're
my-
able to get it.
My best to, I think, probably our Public Works Director would be
Jay.
better positioned to do that. But essentially, we just don't have the same level of folks that are doing resurfacing, right?
So
If
we
you
put
look at
them
it-
out
So
to
it's a
bid,
supply and
and we're not,
demand.
our lowest competitive bid is coming out higher than these other cities. These other cities have more contractors bidding at lower prices.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right.
We just don't have the
We just don't- we just
volume.
don't have
Now, I
that.
don't know how that explains the difference with Raleigh, because you would think they
They
would
would.
have
That's
a
exactly
lot
right.
of contractors too, but,
Yeah.
but I know that that's been a problem in our bidding, right? That sometimes we're only getting one bid, or we're getting no bids.
And asphalt plants.
Good afternoon, Jay Dundas, Capital Projects Director. That is absolutely correct, is that we are in a challenging bid environment right now. And a lot of the sidewalk projects, greenway projects, we are seeing limited bids, or bidding twice, maybe getting one bidder at the second bid. So those are making costs
When you
go up.
retired, start a contracting company
But
and
also
start,
supply.
Well, we also,
start bidding on these projects.
in some of our
You got a plan.
facilities, in some of our facilities projects that we're being designed right now, we're hearing from the contractors and from the design firms that the bid processes across the state are really, there's just so much work to go on right now, and the bid prices are really going up. We're seeing escalation every time we get an estimate. And, for example, the mechanical systems, HVAC work, we heard the other day that the contractor pool out there is very, very limited, and that's what's causing the prices to go up.
Well, is there no city in North Carolina that has its own internal team that does this? And when I think about what we just talked about with not being able to enforce living wage policy or even recommendations for contracting bid workers, would it be a mutual benefit to have our own team?
In some cases, it definitely would. Just hiring skilled tradespeople right now is really difficult. We've had positions open in the skilled trades for 2 years right now, and being competitive in those salaries and finding the people that can actually do that work, I think is reflective of the overall environment. And so we would definitely consider that, but the challenges are just really spread out across the industry as a whole.
And you may recall, actually, Public Works is doing some of that work
In-house.
in-house.
Paving,
It's just the
yes.
volume,
Yeah.
we can't absorb it with our existing staff.
And I think there are statutory limitations on the amount of work that we can do as well.
So I had a couple plan questions. Number one, Asheville Motion Plan isn't listed, the Transit Master Plan isn't listed. I saw the GAP plan.
Sure, and I
But-
certainly was not intending to list all of the
Sure.
plans,
It's
just
just an
examples.
Yeah, and I get that. But what I'm curious about, what Deborah, when you were saying checking boxes, when we've had budget presentations in the past, something that was really helpful as a tool for educating the public was seeing council's priorities and how many checks across.
Absolutely.
I think it's a great way to communicate the multi-solving. So for example, if we're investing in multimodal infrastructure, but it also means that it's more affordable for someone to move to a location for affordable housing, then it's hitting our equitable affordable housing and our transportation goals. So I think that that kind of more 2D presentation could be helpful. This is a great linear presentation of like where we are and where we want to go. But I think that kind of slide will help.
Absolutely.
And I see sustainability on there, but we have a strategic goal around neighborhood and climate resilience. And I think if we can weave that into these conversations in a way that it's, that we're helping folks deal with affordability of cost of living, whether it's cost of transportation or cost of their utilities, those kinds of conversations will help folks get behind this project. And another multi-solving of that, I think that would be a great way to back it up to how the council committees get engaged and also our advisory boards. Our advisory boards, I don't think we use them as effectively as we could, but when we're wanting information on our bonds, doing more outreach to our advisory boards and inviting public conversations there, I think could be a great use of our time. Because I know sometimes like the transit committee's like, oh, we're not gonna have a meeting this month because we don't have items to talk about. Let's get them talking about transportation bonds.
That's a good point.
That's
Yep.
a good point.
Thank you. Any other questions? I will turn it over to Tony.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor, Council, Tony McDowell, Finance Director. I'm going to handle the next several slides as we start to talk more about the GeoBond process specifically and the financial overview of our CIP program. And then I'll be handing it off to Andrew and Doug Carter from our financial consultants, DEC. Okay, as Taylor alluded to in his presentation, we have a lot of needs out there. And one of the best ways of getting additional resources to meet those needs is through GeoBond referendum. So we just wanted to provide you all with a list of some of the types of public infrastructure that are typically funded with the GeoBond. And it's many of the types of things that you all have been hearing about from us that we have needs in, particularly in public buildings, facilities, auditoriums, civic centers, streets and sidewalks, and public transportation facilities as well, and also housing projects, as Taylor mentioned. We're not talking a whole lot about that today, but the affordable housing piece of any potential 2024 GeoBond referendum is on a separate parallel track, and you all will be hearing more about that as we go through the spring. Okay, just a reminder, our 2016 GeoBond referenda that passed here in Asheville was a $74 million program. $17 million went to Parks and Recreation, $32 million to transportation, and $25 million to housing. And that was our first GEO-bond program that we had implemented here in Asheville in a number of years. I think it was close to 30 years since we'd had a successful GEO-bond referendum. Just to give you all kind of a flavor for how local GEO-bond referenda fare in North Carolina, there's a lot of numbers on this chart, but what I'll do is kind of point you all toward that third row, which shows the percentage of referenda that are put out for voter approval and that are approved, and you can see that number is very high. In total, including county and municipal GEO-bond referenda, and I'm not sure of the time frame for this data, but it came in at 94, almost 95%. So most GEO-bond referenda do pass. You can see down below a breakdown of the type of GEO-bond referenda that were included in this information. Some of it's on the county side. You can see public school facilities and community colleges. Those are typically funded by counties. But you'll see some of the categories that we used from our 2016 referenda and are likely to use again in 2024, including parks and recreation, public transportation, and streets and sidewalks as well. So there are some formal actions that you all have to take. As Taylor said, we're going to be talking to you all a lot over the next few months about the budget process, about the capital process, identifying projects for you all to consider. But there's going to be some statutory steps that you all have to take as well as we get closer to a November 2024 possible vote. And there's going to be 3 meetings that you all have to take formal action at. And right now we have those slated for June and July. Those are the latest dates that you all could take action in order for the referenda to make it onto the ballot. Of course, we can always do it earlier if we wrap up earlier, but we're assuming at this point that we're going to align most of this with the budget process, and so you all will be making most of your decisions in the May and June time period on the budget, and that we'll have these formal council actions in that time frame as well. Just an additional reminder, there were a few additional requirements that the state legislature added this year. And it's related to the ballot language. So as of January 1 of 2024, so this would include our ballot in 2024, in November 2024, the language must include a statement that the bond may result in a tax increase. It must also include the estimated bond cost over the total life of the debt repayment and the property tax liability, or the estimated property tax liability increase that could be needed to fund the bond. So again, it's something that was recently passed by the state legislature, something that we'll make sure we do on the staff side and bring to you all to meet this requirement, and it's designed to provide additional transparency to the public as we go through the GEO-bond process. So I think I'm going to stop there and see if you all have any questions on that little slice that I just did, and then I'm going to hand it off to Doug and/or Andrew Carter for the next part of the presentation.
A question on 38, were you just giving us like examples, or were you giving us kind of the top ones on the bottom with the types of issuance? Is that like a list of the top type that aggregate, or you were just pulling ones that might feel relevant to us?
I think that those were all the ones, and I can't remember where this data came from. I think School of Government, do you know what year it was?
This is like,
What I'm trying to be
about
like-
the bottom part
Yeah,
where it
like-
says.
Public schools are the #1 thing bonded. The number 2 is, so this is.
This
so
is all, yes.
Except for in
Yeah.
Buncombe County.
What I do think is interesting is that if you put public transportation, street and sidewalks together, that's actually over 12%. So there's a lot of value in that.
Well,
from our community.
and also our big transportation is happening through the sales tax referendum in Orange, Durham, Beck, Wake.
In addition to this,
In
though.
addition, yeah, because it's funded through sales tax rather than, these are
Right.
property tax, so they're able to, except for when the legislature swoops in and caps them on
Right.
their sales tax, but,
But the community cares about that a lot. Communities care about that a lot.
oh yeah, absolutely. Our transportation bond, I think, was our, you
Very
showed us, it
favorable.
was our smidge most popular.
Yeah, they all passed.
Yep.
I like that trifecta. And then like
And-
public safety instead of parks this time.
I'm trying to, when we did this in 2016, we actually had 4 packages, and I feel like we
Oh.
discarded one, and it didn't get off the runway, and I don't remember.
Yeah, I think there were 4.
I think we felt like this was so ambitious at the time, but it passed overwhelmingly. We could have gone bigger. Yeah.
That's
Anyway.
what this time.
But do you remember what it was that we?
It was either facilities or public safety facilities.
Maggie says public safety.
Public
Public safety,
safety,
okay.
yeah. And we're now seeing the results of that decision.
It's time.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
We hadn't done the facilities tour in our defense.
All right, well, I will
Thanks.
turn it over to the Carters then. Thank you all.
Right. We didn't have Walter.
I know.
Talking about the Pinto.
And Jake,
Walter.
the whole department.
Sorry. Hello.
Hello, Mayor and members of City Council, City Manager, and others on the dais. I'm Doug Carter. This is Andrew Carter. He's my business partner and has some biological connections. Taylor talked about takeaways when he got up, and I'm going to tell you 2 that were important for me, maybe 3 actually. I'll never forget on a sunshiny late fall day a long time ago, my wife and I were sitting in an outdoor cafe in Asheville, and I said, why don't we buy a condo, because a number were getting ready to be built or were, we'll rent it, and then we'll retire in Asheville someday. And every time I drive up here, I think, why did I back out on that argument so quickly when I see all that's happened? The second takeaway is the last time I was in this lovely room is when we announced to City Council that you had obtained your Moody's AAA credit rating, the absolute epitome of saying you're tops in financial planning and execution. So that's another good one. And then the third one I'll say to you is, because we do work in 3 cities that are emerging, Charlotte, Raleigh, and Asheville. And all of you, when you hit peaks, when you're 100,000 people, you aren't anything like the city you were when you were 50,000 people.
Yeah.
Raleigh is this close. I spoke to City Council about this not long ago. It's this close to 500,000. They'll never be the same again. And Charlotte is 30,000 people away from being 1 million people. Who would have ever thought there would be cities this size? And so Asheville is going to move to a next level, like these other emerging cities. You are the business center of southwestern North Carolina, and that will always take you to next levels. I'm going to do the early part of this, and then I'm going to turn it over to, probably I should do down. What we're going to talk about really quickly, we're going to talk a little bit about the financial planning you've done over time and your CIP planning and how that compares. We're going to talk a bit about your current debt outstanding and the resources you dedicate to pay for that debt. We're going to talk about your methods of debt issuance, which are very good, by the way. We're going to talk about future projects that can be funded and are in the debt plan with your present resources. And then we're going to talk a bit about potential new GO bonds, and then a concept of steady state. Council member, you were talking about steady state a few minutes ago. How you make things steady, how you choose what you vote on, how you choose the time periods, how you make that a normal part of your business and planning process for this city. And we'll talk a bit about that.
So that's like what the industry calls it, is steady state financial planning?
Well, it was coined in the city of Charlotte, our home city, but maybe not first, but it's you know, and there's some Charlotte people around here, so, or former Charlotte people, but it's a concept that's been used there for a long time, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then here's the slide I'm going to do really quickly. You guys have a really sound process that you use here. And the thing I want to say in the beginning is, I mentioned Charlotte and Raleigh, they've been our clients for a long time. How you plan with respect to affordability, CIP planning looks just like Charlotte and Raleigh. It's just scale. Processes are very much the same. And I think that is a strong and positive statement for you. You use a debt affordability model that Andrew will talk to you a little bit more about soon. You didn't have one until about 10 or 12 years ago. and now you have a very aggressive one. You've used it consistently, and I'm just going to say that the city council has done a very good job looking at this and understanding that resources were necessary to have affordability. And so you've been a very big part of that process. You have a number of financial policies that guide this decision-making, and you have a blend of debt modes. You issue more than GO bonds. Cities typically do that. In counties, you tend to see more issuances of GO bonds, but cities who have more business entities, a lot more things like arts and things of that nature, tend to use more than one type of debt issuance, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. And that blending, I think, is a positive thing. In 2013, I said that before I got to the point, we were part of these meetings over a number of weeks with engineers, department heads, all these people. I mean, it was many hours of setting the stage for planning into the future. And it became a really great foundation to how you've planned forward from then till now. And this process continues to today, and I will just say this to you, all of that culminated in people saying Asheville plans and does like the cream of the crop, and so you became cream of the crop by your rating analysis. And then I'm going to turn this over to Andrew to talk a little bit more about what's going on. And I may step in and say one or two from time to time.
Sure you will. What we have on the screen now is the current annual revenues that are dedicated to the model, and you see those grow every year because they're kind of connected to the penny. So it has a 3% growth, and so as the growth of the penny grows, the revenues that are dedicated to the model start growing now. And you'll see in fiscal year 24, we're right at that $16.6 million number. That includes the approximately $864,000 y'all put in from McCormick Field. So we're now at that level as it goes into the future. So those are the revenues that really sit behind the model that y'all use to pay for all the capital and debt. So this is what we try to get to, trying to steady one side of the model, which is the revenues, and that's of which what you live under. So our projected revenues, we can then take that and say, what can you afford given the plans that you have and the time periods and what capacity you may or may not have. So that side gets more fixed out so that we can plan for the future. And y'all did that starting way back when. I believe at one point it was a whole conglomeration of different pennies, economic development pennies that were put in years ago, other pennies. You added 3.5 pennies in 2016 to support the then 2016 GO vote for that. So these are the revenues we have, and you'll see the debt outstanding that we currently have. Now that all the GO bonds have been issued, they are now currently outstanding. We're sitting right at 64 million. And we may be scratching our head, well, I thought we had 74 million in GO bonds, but only see 64 million in debt. Well, we didn't issue it all at the same time, so there's been some debt pay down since we issued some original bonds. But as of this time, 64 million remains outstanding. And then the special obligation bonds, that 23 million, that was really the rad tip projects and a lot of the uptown, downtown district projects that you did. And a lot of that supported the infrastructure, the right-of-ways, the sidewalks, the other things you needed to do to build up that area so that businesses could come in and build their businesses. And so that was really an investment there. There is no plans at this current time to issue an additional special obligation bond. So that program is kind of done. I think if you remember the big spend we saw, we had high spend in 2020, that was part of what that was. And then the limited obligation bonds are currently outstanding. What we've spent, just as part of your regular CIP program. Those have been the CIP program since 2016 and moving forward. Of course, we have annual pay downs every year, but that's your current debt outstanding. So a little more than half as GO bonds right now. How does Asheville issue its debt? Well, the city uses what we call a cash flow form. And what that means is instead of getting a loan and then spending it all out on the project, we get a short-term temporary construction loan. It's very similar to like when you might build a house. So So you get to the developer gets a short-term loan to build the house, and then once it's built and in the ground and ready to use, you come in and then get your mortgage and pay off that short-term construction loan. So that's basically what we do here, is we get temporary money to spend over approximately a 2-year period. So we look at your CIP and say, we're gonna spend approximately $40-ish million over the next 2 years. We'll get basically a line of credit, for lack of a better word, to spend that money. And then at the end of the 24-ish month period, we'll go out and fix that out. Well, what does that do for you? Well, spending tends to be slower than we think it is. And so we put in aggressive spending so that we can cover it, but we might have thought we were going to spend $40 million. We only actually spent $35. So then when we do the permanent debt, we don't take out $40 million of the bonds, we take out $35 million of the bonds. That helps the model because we didn't issue that debt as fast as we thought we were, because the spend didn't happen. So this really matches up spend to the debt service and fixing out long-term facilities when they're in the ground and working, rather than making a principal payment on a building that isn't even built yet. Sometimes you have to do that. But so as you said, the budget process, then we get into the construction period. That's that short-term construction period. Then we do the debt issue, and that band is what we call refunded into the long-term 20-year bonds. And now we have a set fixed bond schedule for the next 20 years on those projects. So this is exactly what many, if not all, of the large issuers do at this time. It's not as efficient to borrow the money up front and then probably take 3 to 4 to 5 years to possibly spend it all out. So we have reversed that process. So we only fix out dollars when we've actually spent them. So what do we have in the financial model now? You'll see that for fiscal years 25 to 29, there's a number of different buckets that we have that add up to approximately $145 million in spending in the next 4 to 5 years. Currently, we have a $42 million draw program that's outstanding. That's that short-term construction program I was talking about. We issued that in June of 22. So June of 24 is about 2 years after that spend. So sometime this coming up June, July, August, we will go and fix out what we have spent of that $42 million. Right now, I think about 35-ish has been spent. So there's still some room, but we'll see what happens when we get there. Our next program is a little bit larger based on the spend that we have. So the next program we expect to get into probably mid-2025. We'll get some spending under our belt. One of the great things about your model is that there's a good amount of fund balance sitting in the capital fund. And that's by design. That's so that we can shave off the peaks and valleys of when we need money. If we have the money in the bank, we don't have to go out and raise taxes in order to get them. And we can also use some of that cash now, get a little spending under our belt, and then get into a draw program. So it helps make sure that we're efficiently spending our money and not putting all the debt as fast as we can on the books, which helps the model, which increases capacity.
And all of what you're showing us here is demonstrating how we're doing our general capital stuff, no future bond. It's just kind of explaining the mechanics and then the strategy behind as we have a capital program. When we're doing on an annual basis, you're zooming out and doing financial planning in bigger basis so that we're spending money as efficiently as possible.
So this is an example of how it is bundled, right? Yeah, so it was that was a little bit unclear, and I don't want anyone to be like, what, you've decided already that you're gonna? Yeah, so, I mean, I think it was, I don't know if we have a way to edit the slides, so when so if people check on them, just to say, you know, if it's not already apparent, this is an example somehow.
Correct.
I appreciate though a lot being able to look at a longer term zoomed out, just like in my home budget, I might have a monthly budget, but every once in a while I gotta zoom out on the year budget, and then I'm gonna move my money differently so I can save money, so I think it's
Right.
helpful.
Let me tell you what this parallels. This parallels the CIP and the assumed spending in the CIP. And you can see it corresponds roughly to CIP periods. So the current draw program is projects we have. That's done. The $53 million is projects we anticipate because they're drawn from the CIP. When that 53 million comes up, it will all come to you for approval. You will raise your hand on that draw program and the project that contains. So Mayor, you're exactly right. This is forward-looking, not just today.
Correct. We've taken the CIP that y'all have looked at and adopted, put it into the model, and as you see from the last, it's all affordable within the current resources that we have in the model. So the things that y'all have approved and put into the CIP, they're all affordable in the model at this current time.
Tony gets to keep his job.
So then we talk about additional capacity. Well, we have an adopted CIP. It's going to go past 29 eventually, right? And we saw that slide. We keep adding on that last year as we look at the 5 years moving forward. So the current adopted CIP and the money that we did for the GA bonds were all covered in the current model. There is a bit of capacity past 2029.
So just to be clear, and so I had that wrong, I mean, I think what you guys are showing us on slide 47 is, this is your current situation. And so if you didn't do anything, this is what you got, and you can afford it.
Yep.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Plans are covered as you currently have them adopted.
Good job.
And,
Let me tell you what I think is a really important thing, is we have in the issuance in these two programs more than you currently have outstanding in debt. So there is a goodly amount of money out there yet to be spent on projects. And I think that's a positive for you, but unfortunately it is an unlimited amount. It does have limits. And that's why we're constantly always going forward into the model to see what you have available into the future, not just what you have now.
correct.
Before we move forward, I have a question. I saw the story about what the county was dealing with expenses outpacing revenues. And I guess my curiosity is, I've been asking at the policy, finance, and HR committee level if we could get some sort of projection, like a 3 to 5 year projection on what our wage and compensation looks like. Because I think if we're just talking about revenues without looking at where we can anticipate paying our staff more to retain folks so that we can provide quality, equitable service outcomes, we will walk ourselves into a little bit of trouble.
So did you, to that point, does this status quo project an increase just in the overall budget that would be absorbed with non-debt stuff? And I see Tony getting up, such as salary increases and things like that.
Yeah,
Does it wrap that in? It doesn't assume everything's
just
frozen,
capital.
right? Yeah.
No, yeah, so like Andrew said, we assume right now, this is what we've been doing, is that contribution to the CIP from the general fund, again, we're only talking general fund here, grows by 3% every year looking forward in the model. To Councilmember Roney's question, one of the reasons we do CIP planning and budget together is because it is all tied together. And so we have to take in consideration compensation needs, operating needs, and CIP needs as well. But the budget we bring you all, the proposed budget we plan on bringing you all in the spring will include the 3% increase that's planned here for the CIP. Does that help answer the question?
It does. I just want to make sure we're not forgetting when we zoom out that it's part of a whole.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah,
I think
which would
some
be
of-
the operating. budget.
Well, and I think some of what
Piece of it.
Kim's saying is like we as an organization are looking at capital in these 5-year bigger tranches and an eagerness to look at labor projections in a longer window as well.
Right, because when we've done that before in this organization, I believe it was 2018, we looked at a 5-year projection and it did not bode well for our expenses.
I know we've got folks reviewing some of our HR stuff, but is it, and we've had our salary studies done before. I don't know if anything already exists that would provide that information or if we're gonna need to generate it.
Well, I think it's part of the budget process, and I'm trying to kind of understand the question of, are we looking at a time frame further than, on the operating side, further than the next budget cycle
Yes,
to
exactly.
understand capacity?
Not just like
And-
where we are, but where we're going capacity.
Got it.
So just to drill down a little bit more, so let's say when we're in a budget process, and we know, this year we're looking at a 5% raise, let's say. Are you thinking, like, to get that granular about, and then next year it's gonna be 5%, and the year after that, it'll be 6%, or, you know, in that kind of a fashion, or what are you thinking we would get as a product?
When, in 2018, what I saw was a graph that was presented to the policy, or the finance committee meeting at the time, and it showed just like if we stayed on the current path. So, yes, a 5-year projection out that would show if we did what we did this last year,
Like,
over and over and over
Each-
again.
Okay, so something that, so this year with 5%, if we had some modeling that looked at the cost of providing 5% next year, 5% the year after that, and so on and so forth.
So for example, this, I get that this is separate, but I think the public would ask us, how can you tell me that it's so great that we should increase property taxes for, let's say, a new park, but you can't keep the water on? Like, I think there's gonna be a question about zooming out. Are we retaining public works staff? Are we retaining first responders while we're having this conversation about increasing property taxes? And if we're not prepared to look at 5 years out on all of those, then we're not gonna be able to communicate the whole.
I've not seen a local government do that exactly before, or any government, and I think, I'm assuming the reason is because we can't bind a future council. We can bind a future council on debt, because we signed debt, we approved debt, number one. And number two, you know, what if you have, you know, I've been here through a downturn where we had to go to every department and say, give us a 10% cut across the
Yep.
board.
Right.
And if I'm an employee and I say, hey, I just bought this house last year, assuming you're giving me a 5% raise this year, and now you're not doing it, I mean, we could have a longer conversation about that. I think the idea of trying to, in the aggregate, plan for salary increases that are robust and building a financial model that allows for that ability to the greatest extent possible is really important.
I also think I'm asking us to do something we have done before, which is have a 3 to 5 year projection. And the reason we did it before was because we were nervous about not being able to meet expectations.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was asking Tony.
Yeah, have we done that before? I guess
We're not aware of it,
maybe
but-
maybe I don't know, I recall.
Yeah, we have done forecasts before, and typically what we do on salary and benefits is kind of look at what we've done historically, so over the last few years. So, you know, for example, we did 5% last year, we might assume 5% or 3% or something moving forward based on that. So we have done some 5-year forecasts before. I don't think we've published any in the last couple of years in our budget document.
Do we do it for, sort of in the aggregate, so that we can budget for, you know, we know that our budget will grow by X amount?
Yeah, so we do it for the general fund typically. I think you all saw the water fund this morning, so we have our consultants who do that. With the general fund, I think what you'll see, and I think this is true of almost every local government, is you start to project out, much like what the county talked about, I think, at their presentation. If you follow the trajectory and you follow the revenues and expenses, you're going to eventually get to a point where you see a gap and you're going to see deficits. And so that's really what the budget process amounts to, is it's kind of, our old finance director used to use this term, it's
The
bending.
iceberg.
Yes, the iceberg and the bending of the line. So you know, eventually, if you look at it, you know, and just do a straight projection, your expenses are going to go like this. As you go through the budget process, you bend that expense line and you try to add additional revenue to close that gap as you go.
Okay.
So almost all multi-year projections eventually show a gap as you start to
Right.
move out, so.
But
So
I don't
I
know that
do
we
re-
itemize it in terms
Yeah,
of, we
it
have a
wasn't.
general.
It was
Yeah.
lumped together.
Yes.
Yes, we've certainly done that. We did not say, hey, everybody in Public Works, count on 5% next year,
Right.
4% the next year. We didn't do it quite like that. We just, because at that time, our revenues were underpacing our growth needs. So we were having to, we had to raise taxes to keep up.
I wonder if the example, though, that we're pinning this to of like raises, which is something that, of course, we're often interested in, is underselling the idea of the projections. Because, you know, when I do budgets, I'm also looking at like expanding my services in my business, right? And so it's like, okay, next year I'm gonna have to hire a bunch of new people because I'm gonna grow my service here. Or we needed a new fire station, and so that requires an entire new bucket of labor. And so the projections on this can be about meeting living wage standards or what we anticipate with raises, but also about like service expansion and service growth. So I think that the use case of it being around raises is one one part of it, but just like with capital, there's more cases that could help us with planning and anticipation of if we're gonna spend this amount of money on capital at Thomas Wolfe, that actually means we're gonna need 3 more staff, like, there's other things that are growing besides the wages.
And we have a facility study that actually correlated with the growth of our employee base. So we've got a whole
Yeah, we
lot of
did it in
data
that
that we
tranche.
are already connecting those dots. But as it relates to compensation, and I know, Ms. Ronnie, you have asked us this a number of times. We were awaiting the HR study, and that study is going to help us with a compensation philosophy that we're going to come back and bring back to policy, finance, and HR, so we can discuss what's our baseline? What are we trying to achieve from a compensation perspective? And then that's the minimum. That's our overall philosophy. And if we can meet that, then we look at
What tools we
what's
use.
above and beyond, right?
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for that conversation.
I have one comment to that.
Yes.
Since I was a finance director many years ago, we are not a home rule state on revenues. We're home rule on our expenditures to the extent that we're given the capacity to do services. And I think over time, we're all going to have to basically say, we have to have other means to raise revenues.
Absolutely.
It's not purely the property tax, which is about the one thing we control. And so at some level, looking towards the future, not just to capital, but to cost, hopefully could open the door to you having more capacity to add revenues. I know that makes me a wishful thinking person, but if you don't wishful think, nothing ever happens, right?
Well, the House Speaker visited the Metro Mayor's Conference last week, and that's the speech I gave him when I got my chance to say anything to him for 30 seconds, which was, you got to give more tools to local government to raise revenue.
That's right.
Especially if you want us to pay for all this stuff. So,
Most definitely.
and he was like, okay.
All right.
I'm not sure he listened.
Looking forward to it, yes.
So as I said, there's a small amount of capacity that exists past what the planned schedule spending that we have in there now. And of course, as I said, what influences the capacity? So we get asked this a lot. Well, what is our capacity? Well, a lot of that is dependent on timing and spend and how fast. And so what adjusts the capacity? I mentioned before, slower spend than what we have projected helps capacity of the model. We're not spending as fast, we don't put on debt as fast. That will additionally put on capacity in the model. And then, of course, interest rates and cost of the projects have pressures. In the model, we estimate interest rates high. So it's higher than current market so that we can always capture what we tell you can do, even if interest rates move up higher than they are now. So we do have high interest rates in the model, higher construction prices. And so as those actual numbers come in, we can usually increase capacity to the model because we assume that maybe the interest rate will be 5.5%, it ends up being 4.5% or 4%. So that, again, automatically increases capacity. So oftentimes, as we do projects and put the debt numbers in, the model gets better because we are very conservative, prudent in our assumptions on interest rate and cost. So to increase capacity past the 2029, we got to spend a little bit slower, or we need additional revenues in the model. So this gets us started talking about the next GO bond program that we're looking at. As you'll remember, in 2016, we did the exact same type of exercise. We had the current CIP in the model, paid for, there was additional capacity in there, and the question was asked, what if we do $74 million in bonds? And so we did some estimates that came up with, we need about 3.5 cents, and that's what council ended up doing. After the bonds were voted, the next bond year, you put those 3.5 cents in, and that's paid for the program, the last GO program as it is, and it's all folded in all of the capital. So it has also helped support some of the LOBs or other general government programs that are not just general GO-based. So what we brought for today to begin a discussion, these are illustrations and examples on ways you can look at how to add GO bonds into the model and look at its affordability. So the number we started with right now is 150. We're just kind of throwing some numbers out, starting with a couple of illustrations of where we are. So we could vote 150 million in 2024, right? Go to the bond. Now, I'm not saying which buckets that's in, whether that's transportation or roads or however you want to split that up. But what if we went for a total package of 150 million? We'd vote that in 24. We would do approximately 18 months after the vote. You have the planning and you guys start getting contracts. You guys start gearing up for that program now that we got approval from the voters. And so approximately 18 months after the vote in 2024, we would issue the $150 million draw program, the construction vehicle, and then after that, we would fix it out a couple of years later. So that's how it's sitting in the model. We could also maybe switch it up and do 2 votes, maybe not do it all in 2024, but we come back again in 2028, do 2 votes of 75 million. So that 150 million first vote in 2024, it's going to probably take 6 or 7-ish years to probably spend all that out. We don't expect to spend all that in 1 year. So in approximately the same time period, we'd spend 150 million in approximately the same time period, but we would split it up and do 2 votes in 24 and in 28 for a smaller package each time. And again, each one of those would follow 18 months after each vote. We do our construction period and then the takeout. And another example is, well, what if we didn't wait 4 years for the next vote? What if we just did a GO vote every 2 years? And so as you start seeing, we're getting to what we call the steady state, right? We're starting to think, how can we get into the business of doing GOs? Asheville hadn't done GOs in a very long time. In fact, I believe the last vote, it was voted down when they were done before, but in 2016, they passed, pretty high. And so what's been successful in a lot of other clients is to get on this, what we call the steady state schedule. Everyone knows that GO votes are coming, right? So it's either every 2 years or every 4 years, and we can plan for that a little bit better because we kind of have a steady state. Where are we spending? And we can model that out for 20 years, type of thing. So these are just 3 illustrations that we've come up with. Do a 1 vote, try to spend it all. That's what we did in 2016. We did the 74 million. It took us the full 6 or 7 years to spend that. The second illustration is 2 votes, approximately 40 years away from each other. And then the third is every other year we would do a vote. But this is essentially the same spending in the same time period.
Can I just mention steady state one more minute, and I'll use Charlotte, our home, that's where we lived. I used to work for them many years ago. The way that affordability model works is essentially every other year, the city of Charlotte votes about $250 million in bonds in 3 primary purposes: transportation, affordable housing, and certain facilities. It votes the same 3-1 every time. And every 2 years, when you go to vote the city and the county vary. And when you go to vote, it's primarily on the even years, which is the big turnout years. You go into the booth and you're going to vote for governor, you're going to vote for big officers, and you're going to vote a bond issue. And it's 3 purposes, and it's this. And the way they've structured their model is basically that moves permanently into the future. Every 2 years, that money's going to be voted and issued. And the debt affordability model has included enough revenues to pay for that.
So they're not having to raise taxes because they're rolling off debt as they're rolling on debt.
In order to sustain the program, the tax rate's been raised twice.
Over what period of time?
About every 10th year, there's had
Yeah.
to be, roughly, don't quote me, but it's been a number of years.
It's
But
usually
it's
in the
that
bigger projects.
consistency. And I did hear you say something that makes sense to me, instead of the parks as facilities, because we just did a facility study, and there's a number of facilities that need to be addressed across all different kinds of uses, all over across the city. But what I heard is transportation, housing, and facilities.
Now, the reason the city of Charlotte doesn't vote parks is that's done by the county.
The county does.
Right.
No city parks,
Yeah.
all county parks.
I think
We still
Rock-
have park facilities.
Yeah, we do. Now
Quickest
Raleigh just
winners.
passed, Raleigh passed like a $350 million parks bond last year, or whenever the last even year.
It's about half that, but it's big.
Oh, I thought it was three. I
They've
thought it
got
was-
that much in their plans, but it was
Right.
big.
The town of Holly Springs just did 100 million in their vote.
So,
They're
Town of
always-
Holly Springs.
They
Town of
used
High
to be
Springs.
CODA.
They passed
so
100 million.
when you
Parks.
get to a steady state, the way that we package these things maximizes the spending for the revenue that we're gonna have. Whereas when we did the bond in 2016, it needed to be hand in hand with a tax increase because we were out of steady state. And right now, we're looking at, we're starting the conversation today with numbers as big as up to 150 million. Are we in a steady state? I don't think we
Well,
are.
I
Like,
mean-
we haven't gotten to that point that
Yeah,
we will have to have
We're
tax
gonna show you another
conversations.
slide, the next slide of kind of
Right,
impact.
right.
Yeah, let's see,
Yeah.
because I'm trying to remember what we actually even had to do. We did have to forecast the increase, but I don't know
How
what we
tight it was.
actually had to do.
Yeah. And then, yeah. the next
But I
slide's
can't see
interesting.
Tony anymore, so I don't know if he knows that, but let's look at the next slide.
Well, I was gonna say, yeah, it was a 3.5 cent tax rate increase that was associated with the 2016 bond, so.
But we did not look, would that 3.5 cents sustain another 74 million?
Yeah,
On and
because
on,
our
on
tax
and on.
rate, I think our tax rate now is fairly flat, because it went up and it got adjusted back down, and
Yeah, and it happened during a revow year, and this one would also, if the voters approve the bond in 2024, the tax rate adjustment will happen during a reevaluation year, so chances are the actual rate will go down, it will just not go down to a revenue neutral.
yeah,
rate.
so because I don't remember that we actually increased the rate 3.5
No, you-
cents. We didn't.
You did not, the rate just did not go down as far as it
But
would
that
have.
doesn't mean that, it depended on your property value, as to what kind of increase you actually saw.
Experience.
But for purposes of meeting the statutory requirements, you do need to forecast it as if there's no rate adjustment and what the rate increase would require.
Yeah.
And so, getting more into the steady state, more and more of the larger cities are moving to this so they can give their councils and governing bodies kind of the forward-looking, what do we have to spend? Rather than always asking the question, how much can we spend and what can we afford? They already have that answered, and so now the question becomes, of the steady state that we've created, which buckets get filled this time? And so next time, you still got the same amount of money, but next time, the affordable housing bucket might be larger, and facilities might be something smaller. So the spending stays steady, but the buckets that it goes into can be determined by the governing bodies. So it shaves the peaks and valleys off the debt service and the resources, so we're not constantly coming back and saying we need some extra revenues here or not. The resource allocation, I think that was a good City of Charlotte example there, where they are able to, just like we said with this past, they're able to do a lot of their GA programs, and if they have something big that comes up that kind of bursts the steady state bubble, they can add some additional revenues into it if they believe it's projects that are worthy. And of course, the consistent cycle has many benefits, especially to the public, because it just becomes a normal part of capital raising in the city. And it occurs periodically. As Doug said, in Charlotte, we're used to doing it, we're used to seeing it. It's not every 4 or 8 year where you're being asked a question. If you haven't been paying attention to it and you get into the voting booth, they're like, well, what is even this question? Sometimes the way it's worded is not very easy, and so it really gets everyone on the same page on that way as well. So here's the slide we've been looking for.
Right.
So under the illustrations, and if we put the illustrations into the models, what would that look like? And of course, we're assuming 5% fixed rate debt. We're assuming some pretty high debt for the construction note period, just so we can capture everything in. And these are, again, back of the envelope kind of illustrations. So if we did all 150 million at one time, we would need approximately $10 million in additional revenue.
Per
So you
year,
saw
per year.
per year from now on. So that's 16 million we saw, it jumped to 26.
I'm just interrupting you, I'm sorry, but, because for people that don't know what's going on with this slide, I mean, it might need to say this is per year for a period of 20 years, because a lot of people don't.
I definitely agree.
Like me,
Yes, it
just
is
read.
from now until the model goes out. And so if we split it up and do different votes, we can shave off some of that. And so, you know, a lot of the questions probably coming up are, well, what does that $10 million mean? What does that equate to as far as a penny and stuff? And I know that Tony has done some other back of the envelope calculations, because as he said, there's going to be a reval year probably. So we're going to have some different values to look at. But if we guesstimate where a penny might be, that's around 5 pennies. $10 million would be around.
So I thought we were, what our per penny was, two on the nose now?
Yeah, it's roughly $2 million right now.
And so that would probably change with the reval, of course. But, you know, so whatever the 10 million turns into pennies on that way. But it is, you know, right now you're doing 15 or 16, so you're going to need about 2/3 more of what you're currently putting in order to pay for that. And so by doing that, splitting it up into other votes and spending it over a little bit different time periods, we could shave off some of that. So if the penny's around 2 million, the next program's about 4 pennies, and then we got about 3 and some pennies for the other program. But these are just representative right now. We just kind of want to throw some stuff out to get you thinking.
This is showing us the conceptual numbers for
Yeah.
the conceptual
Very
model.
Order of
This is
magnitude,
illustration.
not exact
We
science.
could
Yeah.
look at it,
So-
50,000.
So, and this is the oddity about a reval year, because you could
Yeah.
have a flat, you could do a flat number and get your 5 pennies in a reval year, but the other thing I asked him more for was a differential property tax rate for second homeowners, by the way. And I mentioned that South Carolina is beating us in that regard, because sometimes that'll get the legislature moving if they think South Carolina is beating us on something.
And what did he say to you about that?
He said, he didn't, yeah.
I'm just going to say this, our property tax system is also not home rule in terms of how you set it. It's
Right.
very constitutional in North Carolina. That's been discussed many times, and that needs to be looked at. In South Carolina, it's not a constitutional impediment. In South Carolina, they can set differential rates, they can set differential methods for how they calculate values. Here, ours is all set by the Constitution. It's equal dollar.
Right.
equal.
For commercial, for residential, I mean, it's just,
Right.
it's just
We're
nuts.
about out of time, but I want to say something so you'll know that we didn't say earlier. We said we had 20-year debt. The state of North Carolina makes us issue level principal. It's not like a mortgage application. So it's not level payments over 20 years. The payments start to decline because you're paying the principal faster. So in this
That's right,
example,
cycles.
you would pay off half that debt in 10 years. So once you reach that number, you will build additional capacity out of this number. It's not the same. So the positive is, once you set the revenue, and we'll report this to you every year multiple times as we do in finance in the manager's office. So you will get additional capacity.
So if you set a steady state program, fundamentally, the financial model will grow. Because of the way the model works, you will create more revenue to work with?
Because of debt payoff.
That's
correct.
bonkers.
It's a
though.
closed loop
Right.
system, so, you know, it's kind of like a budget within your budget.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't leak out to the operational
Right.
side. So years where you have less expenses than you had revenues, it builds that fund balance. You use that fund balance to then shave off the years that you had.
Other thing that's attractive of this type of model is just the capacity to deliver from staff side. Like this last bond, we built a capital department, which is awesome and wild that we hadn't before, and y'all have done a great job, but, to pace it through, it just means you're phasing the big contracting, that just the volume of the pipeline gets spread out over time.
And this is on top of the 140 we already saw from the CIP.
Right, our existing capital program.
Now this is another, you know,
So I think, I guess I'm so eager to get moving on doing this that I wonder if there's kind of a way for us to jumpstart it with a larger bond package and then regulate with the smaller regular ones. Like what if we did 100 million in the bond package in 2024 and then thereafter it was 50, or we skipped a cycle and started 50.
We'll
You
roll
know,
on with that.
unless that doesn't make sense. The other factor here that we have to think about is Thomas Wolfe, and because that's not a geo bond product, so, yeah. I think our failed bond, well,
It could take up the entire capacity.
well, and it wouldn't, and we don't need it to, because we're hoping the Tourism Development Authority will pay for a lot of that, and our
That's correct.
partners,
Yep.
which Maggie's helping head up that process and finding all the money to do that, so that it doesn't disrupt this. Yeah.
So if I could just add, great comment about capacity. That's one of the things I want to make sure we talk about before we end the presentation is with the $150 million, both staff capacity and debt capacity, because as you all mentioned, I mean, we had a $74 million bond package in 2016. It took us almost the full 7 years to spend that money. And so the staff capacity to spend $150 million in the 7 to 10 year bond window is something to consider. And then also our debt capacity. And while I've got these guys standing here, one of the things we also need to keep in mind is, like we mentioned, we're planning on issuing $145 million in LOBS debt, limited obligation bonds debt, over the next 5 years. And then once we layer on this additional debt, if we were to go with a $150 million package, that's adding significantly to our debt per capita. And that's one of the measures that the rating agencies look at. And Doug mentioned, he started the presentation talking about the AAA bond rating that we have. We don't want to do anything to put that in jeopardy. And that's one of the things, if debt per capita starts to go up quickly, that's one of the things that S&P and the other rating agencies can look at, and it can negatively affect our bond ratings. I don't know if you all, if anything you all want to add about that.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Debt per capita in growing cities like Asheville and others is rising. Debt in North Carolina is high, relatively, but we have some of the highest credit ratings in the country because how it's managed and how it's paid for and how it's planned for. So if we had all of this together at 100,000 people, we're at $2,500 per capita. I'm not gonna tell you what federal debt is per capita, we don't talk about that. But the point is that inconceivably high? No, but right now we're at $1,000 per capita. So we just have to look at how we're building it and how we're spending it and how we're timing it.
I have a question that's not on the slides. Can some of these loans pay for the labor needed to execute the loans? Do we get project management dollars in these loans or something? So we have a human capital limitation that we'll need to plan for bulking up the staff who can execute all these projects, but that the money itself can be rolled into the estimates
It's
that we're looking
eligible
at.
expense.
Yeah,
And
okay,
of course,
that's what I thought, I just forgot.
All your
just couldn't
external
remember.
planning money is covered by this.
Right.
All the third party engineers.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think about a little bit of a break, because we need to do a couple
Yes,
things
ma'am.
before this meeting starts at 5.
If I might, just like as we're talking about bonds in general, at every single bond conversation, I know we have deep affordability concerns in our community. We also have questions about how the property tax rate is structured in Buncombe County. So I'm just going to be committed to every single bond conversation talking about affordability for even our own staff, making sure we back our bonds up with policy that achieves deeply affordable, equitable, accessible housing, and that we continue property tax mitigation.
Thanks for bringing that up. I agree.
Can you do a bond specifically for deeply affordable housing?
Well, the last housing bond was the 25 million for affordable housing, and we kind of roughed out some projects ahead of that one. But of course, it's not like a contract in that sense.
So the bond would say affordable housing.
Yeah.
Our policy in terms of how we execute and
that's how you do it.
spend.
But could the bond
Yeah.
Yeah,
say
absolutely.
deeply?
Well, we'll wait
I
till the
don't
bond
know if
lawyers
the
descend upon
language
us, but
on
yeah, it's because the
Yeah.
language on the ballot is highly regulated, so I
Yes.
don't know the answer to your question. I think we'd
Right.
have to check to see if we could use those words.
That's
But
why I
is the-
said backed up by policy.
But is the
Yeah.
point of what you're saying, we've been discussing the difference between like middle income housing strategies and deeply attainable or deeply affordable
No,
housing
I
strategies,
understand
so
that.
we ensure that the money of a bond went to the lower income thresholds.
Because the language,
The bond
deeply
language.
affordable, is a term of art,
Right.
Right.
specifically
be
geared at a certain level. So I was wondering if that particular language can be used. And it sounds like we
Yeah,
don't
we'd
know.
have to,
We,
we'd
yeah, I
have to
think we need to
research
check,
that.
because I just remember that when we did this last time, it's a little funny how you have to phrase them, and now we have this additional language we have to put in there.
I think you want fairly broad language, affordable housing, but as a policy of council, you could make this very plain as to how you intend to spend those dollars.
Every 2 years.
And we can't advocate for bond as
No,
such.
last
We
time,
can
yeah.
inform, but we can't advocate.
And last time we did it, the chamber helped, they
Right.
raised money and did kind of an advertising campaign around it. The city we did put together a presentation to inform the community about what it would include, and then individual members of council, myself, could go around and provide the presentation to the community, answer questions, and there was some staff support for that, because it was, informationally based, and we tried to make sure we went around the city into all the communities, regionally throughout the city, so people could come locally and hear about it. So, it was probably overkill, given how well they did, and I'm sure in cities that have a regular bond process, they don't need to go jump through hoops and make signs and
That's the other
do
beauty, every
stickers.
2 years, you know, the committee's
Yeah,
going to be the
and
next
you,
year.
yeah, so, okay, well, thank you all very much.
Fantastic information.
We appreciate it.
Then, thank you very much. Appreciate all the hard work from staff. We can conclude. We don't have any additional information to share, and we will resume in about 20 minutes for the work session.
All right.
Council meeting.
Okay, thank
All
you.
righty. Thank you all. We appreciate your attention.